I'm a research consultant and training coordinator with ACENET. We also have joining us Gurpreet and Jessica, who are also, well, Gurpreet is also a research consultant, and Jessica handles our cybersecurity. They are joining us from St. FX and Halifax, respectively. They are the helpers, also seen as co-hosts, and they will be monitoring the chat throughout the session to answer any questions that you have. So should you have any questions throughout the session, I highly encourage you to use the chat to ask them. In case we're new to Zoom, we'll just go over, there'll be a lot of stuff that's covered actually within this session that will introduce things in Zoom, but the main one that you need to know for questions is to find that chat. A number of you have found it already, but that is in the bottom of your screen. There's an options bar. It sometimes disappears. Mine is at the top of my screen here, but yours should appear at the bottom. So you might have to bring your mouse down to pop it out. There's your mute button, your video button, and then there's also a participants tab. You can click that. That will show you all of the participants in this session, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. And then beside that, you should see the chat, or slightly down from that. Mine looks a little bit different because I'm hosting. If you open up that chat, that will sort of be an ongoing chat throughout. You can message privately in that. So you can select a name, maybe it's to a helper or myself. If you message me privately, I might not see it right away just because I am going through the presentation, but I will do my best to get to it. Gurpreet and Jessica will monitor that very carefully throughout and try to answer your questions as we go. I will also keep an eye on that. If there's any questions that would be very helpful for everybody to hear the answer to, then I will definitely try to address them. The structure of this session is meant to be about an hour presentation, and then I've sort of reserved that last half hour, that last 30 minutes, to be a time for questions and discussion. And in the last two sessions, that has been really valuable. There's been some good ideas shared throughout, and a lot of us come from a lot of different fields and may have different things to share. So that is the intention of that. I will do my best to answer your question, and if I can't, it's very possible that somebody else here can. So if you have sort of a more in-depth question, you can save that to the end, and we can go with that there. All right, so before I get started with my presentation, I would just like to tell you a little bit about who we are in case you haven't heard of us before. So ACENET has been around for over 15 years. We are the Atlantic Regional Consortium of Compute Canada. So this is of post-secondary institutions in Atlantic Canada. And I am located in St. John's, Newfoundland, but that spreads around all of Atlantic Canada. And we provide access to digital research tools and infrastructure. We also have research consultants, as I just sort of mentioned, that are located around Atlantic Canada to help you figure out what you need and how to get started. So essentially, if there's something that you need to learn on your computer, or you need more computing power in order to process your data, store your data, many other different things involved in research, then that's what we are here for. We are completely free for anyone who is a part of any of our institutions in Atlantic Canada, or rather any academic institution. So if you haven't heard of us before, I encourage you to follow up and get more involved with what we have to offer. This could be very useful for you and or your graduate or any research students that you may have. Okay. All right. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay. So the intention of today's session is really just to give an idea of what we've learned so far in doing our training. So since we have all been working from home, within ACENET, we do a lot of training, and we have had to adapt to the online version of this. So since mid-March, we have done about 150 hours of online training. This has been in single sessions, full sort of course-like sessions, as well as multi-day workshops. And really our goal of this session here today is to share with you what we've learned. So some of the do's and don'ts, some of the things we found that work well, some things to consider, and very specific things like videos, for example, whether or not you should request that from your students, what kind of implications that may have. So we're going to get really specific with those things and hopefully give you an idea of some of what you should or might help to consider before you actually start your course. And my hope with this is all of what we've learned along the way. We did not know a lot of this stuff when we started, hence why I'm trying to share it now. But my hope is to save you some time so that you actually know that in September, and not in December when our courses get up and running for the fall. All right. So in the outline today, we'll start off by discussing setting up your settings. We're all working on different platforms, and I'm going to address that in a second, but how to actually get things set up the way that you like them. Then we'll go over the expectations for online etiquette, similar to how I started this session, and we're going to talk about the importance of that lecture number 1. Okay, so what do you need to bring up right away? What sort of things will help you flow quicker throughout the semester? Then we're going to get into feedback. That's going to be a very big topic of really how can we gain feedback from our students? How does that help us as the instructor and help our students stay engaged? And as we all know, it can be very exhausting staring at a screen, right? So how do we help them through that and help ourselves as well? Next, we'll talk a little bit about recording lectures, some things to think about there, as I'm sure that will be a question and topic for a lot of people come the fall. We'll do a couple examples of exercises and how these can be implemented in the online environment. And then we'll get to a couple special functions. So yesterday we actually tested this in the session in terms of breakout rooms, and we'll discuss remote control, but we'll see what the interest is like there. And if we'd like to discuss that, we can. I've actually been recently informed that breakout rooms, that's the Zoom name for these. We'll discuss what they are towards the end of the session. These actually have, they are available in a lot of other online platforms, which I was really grateful to find out. So we can discuss how those are used. And then we'll get to that question and discussion. Okay, so platform settings. So what these are is how you need to set things up in the beginning before you actually start your sessions to have things the way that you want them. And a lot of these will be controlling your control in the session, as well as making sure that things are the way you want them in terms of security and those sorts of things. So first of all, find out what platform is being used at your institution. I think many institutions have already decided on a platform, most likely have a license with that platform, and are highly recommending that that is what is being used. We had a question yesterday about being overwhelmed with being too many platforms and what to use. Keep in mind a couple things in that. Students will get used to one thing, and if they're being required to use multiple different things, that can be really challenging for them. Also, likely your learning and teaching office at your institution has chosen the platform for a specific reason, has a license, so you have a lot more capabilities with it, being a part of that institution, and they will be able to help you through it. So check out what that is. I am discussing this obviously on Zoom today, and that is what we have been using. That has been the best option for us in getting started, and somewhat what we jumped into and what we were most comfortable with. However, many of what we discussed today or pretty much everything we discussed today can in some way be adapted for the platform that you're using. And also note that, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, some institutions actually have a meeting or webinar platform, as well as other tools that you can use to gain feedback from your students, do exercises, those sorts of things. For example, UNB is using Poll Everywhere, right? So that would be a little polling, multiple choice kind of live option that you can use, right? It'd be similar to clickers within classes. So some of these settings that you want to look at, sorry, just admitting someone, would be muting your participants upon entry. So everybody comes into your meeting and it's not distracting and you don't have to say, please mute yourself over and over again. Another one is requesting permission. So all of you entered a waiting room when you came into this meeting, and then we admitted you. We keep it standard that way. Also, I think that is about to become mandatory within Zoom. So that's just a little safety so that you can see, as you start to recognize your students' names, who's actually attending your lecture. Participant videos, on or off. You can have it set so that it has a default. They can also control that default. So you only have a certain amount of control there. I usually have people have it off as they come in. It's easy for them to then turn it on if you choose to. Permissions for screen sharing. I have an example of this in the next slide, but that'll be important if you ever intend for your students to share their slides or share their screen. Accessibility options. This can be a really useful tool. As you know, I tend to talk fast when I get excited about a lot of this. And as I said previously, my passion is in teaching and training. And if you are someone like me who talks quickly, or if you have students where English is not their first language, the closed captioning can be super, super helpful. It may not be perfect, keep that in mind, But we used one on I think it was Google Meet. It was actually not that bad. So that may be something that you want to look into within your options as well. And then other controls that you have during the meeting as a host. So right now, as a host here, I can control your mics. So if a mic shows up, then I can unmute and mute you. So this can be useful if a student forgets to mute themselves and you're hearing a lot of background noise, then you can just hit mute there. I actually have not used closed captioning in Zoom. That's a good question, Kathy. And I'm not sure if anyone else can do that. I believe it does, but I'm not positive. So if you have any answers to that, sorry. I can definitely try and find out for you though. Okay, so I just have a couple examples of what that looks like in Zoom when you're actually setting your settings. The biggest thing to point out here is that these may not be in your app. So most often nowadays, it's easiest to download the platform that you're using. So downloading Zoom, as we gave you the option to do, or maybe you're connecting from a browser today, which is also really helpful, giving your students the option to connect from a browser. But note that these may not be accessible to change from the app. So you may actually have to go to the browser, log in to whatever platform you're using, if that's Zoom, or I know Memorial is using WebEx, maybe it's Google Teams, something like that. Then in there, you may have a lot more options of what you can do. So check that out. These are just a few of what I was talking about before. So the waiting room, screen sharing. So I have the option that everybody can share, but right now, as I'm sharing, none of you can share over me. So that can be important too, as the instructor. Just a few more settings here. So this is the join from the browser link to give people the option. Things like breakout rooms need to be turned on here in order to have the option when you're in the meeting. Remote control, that's something that I'll talk about afterwards. Again, needs to be turned on in settings. Allowing participants to rename themselves. So I requested earlier that Gurpreet and Jessica add helper in their name. This allows a number of different things. It actually got brought up yesterday that you can include your preferred pronouns within that. I know it's really helpful for me when I was teaching my class that if someone asks a question, I can address their name directly. It's a little bit more challenging if it comes up as a phone number or as your email. So my email would come up as G Fishbein, which is, a little bit less, it just reduces the connectivity, I guess. So I find it both more formal and less formal to actually address them by name, right? And sort of connect with your students a little bit more. So asking them to do that can be helpful. And they can essentially type anything that they'd like in there. So they can, like I said, include pronouns, they could exclude their last name, etc. This last one here, we'll talk about this now. So nonverbal feedback. So this needs to be turned on within settings. So what I would like you to do is go to the participants tab. So if you found the chat, the participants tab is not too far away from that. It's between the chat and the video, I believe. There could be slightly different settings on different operating systems. If you click participants, you will get a nice long list. It'll be a pop-out bar or just a sidebar to your Zoom window. And this is a list of everybody who's in the meeting. So I believe I show up at the top because I am the host. So you can see me there and then you can see everyone else. So right now we have 72 people here. That's awesome. And then what this nonverbal feedback is that I'm talking about is at the bottom of your participants tab, there are what we call, they're buttons, but we call them stickers or stickies. And you should see a raised hand, yes, no, go slower, go faster, and then more, which includes thumbs up, thumbs downs, clapping, and a cup of tea and a clock. So in that, if you have found it, could we click the yeses? So if you found it, click the yes, and you'll notice they start to pop up besides everyone's name. Awesome. Yeah, and I don't think everyone else can see this, but I believe host and co-host, I can see the number of people that have said yes. So without scrolling through to get, okay, is it most people? I see that 46 people have hit yes in the participants tab. Now, if anyone wants to test out the other ones, feel free. Try no, go slower, go faster. Those can be used as well. So we use this the most for feedback. And now I'm getting notifications now, by the way, every time people raise their hand. So that can be an option as well. It just pops up so that way you see it as the instructor. Yeah, awesome. So I think most people have found those. Let us know in the chat if you haven't, and Jessica and Gurpreet will help walk you through those. But we use these a lot. So everything from how's everyone doing? We haven't heard anything in chat in a while. Are we doing okay? To please put up a yes if you're, awake and staying with us. And that can be just really helpful for doing a quick little check-in, as well as, you know, okay, we're going to do this example. If you need more time, put up go slower. If you're done, put up yes. If you're not doing it, put up no, or whatever it is, right? So we'll sort of, I'll probably mention those again, but they are super useful. Now, I know I tested out WebEx recently. I'm not an expert in it, but I know they have the raise hand feature. So even with one button, you can do so much, right? So you could just treat that as your yes. And we'll talk more about this in feedback, but there's a lot that you can do with very little in order to try to get some feedback from your students. Okay, so next I want to discuss some online etiquette. So I'm just going to share a document I have here, so you'll have access to this. So I'm putting this in the chat. All right, so you can open this as well on your computer if you have the space. If not, I'm going to share my screen, so don't worry, you'll be able to see it. Let's go right there. Okay. So all this is a little write-out. We have this specific for our training sessions. I've adapted it for today's session. And just to give you an idea of the things that are important to walk through in your very first session. So before you start talking about anything that's content, introduce your students to what your lectures are going to be like live online, okay? So most likely, if you know they've attended other lectures, they're probably going to be somewhat familiar or getting familiar with the online platform. But this is the important time to tell your students how you're going to use it. So starting with, like I said, introducing the options to mute and unmute your mic, to turn your video on or off. We'll talk, I think we'll talk a little bit more about that, but those are kind of stuff we kind of keep coming back throughout this lecture, but the video on or off is a decision that will depend on a lot of different things. We'll talk about a little bit with recording and how that may affect your students' choices. But I'll just say that we initially thought that we wanted everybody's videos on. Because with that, I can see your faces, I can see responses, I see a few of you nodding along, which just makes me feel better as the presenter, which is fantastic. But you get a sense of, okay, they're grasping the concept. Some students will nod, other students, you know, are confused. Maybe they're not there. You can see that, right? So we actually thought this was going to be super helpful. It did not turn out that way. We were doing workshops with 30 people. So already that's challenging. I can see 4 of you right now, and that's very doable, but there's obviously many more of you in this session. So some people, I think when we first started, there was probably about 4 or 5 people that had it on within 30, and that was fine. The issue you run into is basically the real estate of your computer screen and your students' computer screens. Okay, so that's something that, again, we learned later on, and something that you'll want to keep in mind depending on what you're going to do. So what you're going to share, what you're going to require your students to have open throughout your sessions. We do a lot of coding and programming, so they usually need to code and program along with us. And so they're typing and need to have that open. However, they also need to see our screen when we're sharing and typing. So that's already 2 things that they need to have side by side on their maybe 13-inch laptop. Right now, we do require people have a laptop, or highly, highly suggest it. We haven't had many people join with a phone for our sessions. There are some that we're offering now, which with our humanities and social sciences workshop series, which are doable, but our other live sessions, that's challenging. So all that to say is that as soon as you add a face to the screen and keep videos on, it's harder to keep track of. Now, perhaps you have a class of 12 people, perhaps discussion is a huge part of what your lecture is about and what your field is about, and maybe that is the most beneficial, then that may be very, very valuable for you to have your videos on, right? And that may be something that you need to include in your pre-lecture emails is, you know, get a video, we need to have those on, we're going to be discussing things. So some things to consider there, and we can come back and discuss that a little bit more later on, but we actually found that having them off was better for our circumstances. The next thing I had here was the participants tab. So that's what we just discussed. You can suggest students can rename themselves if they choose to. The stickies at the bottom, that's usually when I get people to test them out, as I just did. So we know they found them. And then you can take a minute, make sure they found them, especially if you plan to use them. If they can't find them in the first session, they're probably not going to tell you in the second one that they don't know where they are. So spend time there. Talk about how you're going to use the tools. So what are you going to use it for, right? Give them at least a little bit of intro. Introduce the chat. The chat is a very big one, as I did in the beginning, so that you feel like you can ask questions. We encourage people not to interrupt the instructor when we're going through the lectures, and instead are vigilant either with our helpers. We've been fortunate enough to have some resources as helpers. So if you have a TA, that's a really good use to have them watch the chat and respond to questions. If you don't, I taught a course that was sort of went from having helpers and training sessions to teaching by myself. And so I had both of those experiences. And to be honest, if you take the time to stop and look at the chat, it's not too bad to keep an eye on it. The interesting thing about this online environment, which is, I think, very beneficial and different from the in-person sessions, is that people seem actually more willing to ask questions because it's not entirely anonymous, but it's a little bit more anonymous. They don't have to raise their hand. They don't have to have the class turn and look at them. They don't have to speak out loud. They can simply type it in the chat. And it could be as simple as, sorry, I didn't get that last point. Could you clarify that? And then someone else may see it. And as someone else sees it, they're going, oh, me too. Yeah, please clarify that for me too. So they're, feeling a little bit more comfortable that they're not the only one that didn't understand that. The other very unique bonus to this, and this could be specific to the course I taught, it was a graduate course, and there was a lot of students from different backgrounds on different topics we discussed. It was very interesting to see that sometimes other students were able to answer their classmates' questions before I got to them, which was brilliant, right? They're helping each other, they're learning because of that. Someone may ask a question that they almost know the answer to, so then they go and figure it out. I thought that was such a cool bonus of the online lectures that just didn't exist as much, especially within my field in the sciences. That was hard. I don't know, I'm going to try to recreate it when we get in person, but I haven't seen that happen as naturally before. So that was really cool. Now, of course, if you see something in the chat that's worth addressing, absolutely do that. Then you can have that. If you have TAs or helpers, you could have them interrupt you. That's usually what we do. If that question needs to be addressed before you move on to a different topic. We'll get back to this in feedback, but stopping to ask is a big one too, right? And stopping to check. So the other thing you can offer them here in the chat is how private messages will work. So they could private message you if they're uncomfortable and want to keep that more anonymous so that their classmates don't see what they're maybe struggling with or what their question is. What you need to note here is that there is the private chat option, which also can be turned on and off in the settings. Just note to your students that this is not entirely secure, as essentially should be a broad understanding of anything that we're putting online. So not to put any confidential information within any of the chat, and discuss that you're not going to be talking about any confidential information within the session. And that sort of addresses, we had a question earlier sort of about security, and that's the big thing that we address within it, is just, I think sometimes, we haven't experienced this, thankfully yet, but people can get brave in the online environment because of the anonymity. So that's just something that's worth saying. Then you can address the topic of recordings, which we'll get to a little bit later, and explain any other tools that you might be using. So if you're using Poll Everywhere, if you're using Kahoot, Slido, there's a few other ones we'll get to. Don't worry if you don't know what those are. Discuss those then and how you'll use it. And I highly encourage you to test out anything you will be using. Okay. And then lastly, just talking about respect. As I said, people can get brave in the online environment. So this is just the time to say, okay, same code kind of goes, let's treat each other with respect, and keep that consistent throughout your sessions. I will also be sharing my slides with you after the session, so you will have access to that document in case you didn't get it just then. I'm just going to go back and share my slides again for you. All right. So hopefully you can see the online etiquette. All right, so continuing on with the discussion of that lecture number 1. So this is very important to sort of lay down the law with what you expect throughout your lectures. And I would say put the most planning into this first session and thought into how you want them to actually function. So a couple considerations here, and stuff that I wish I realized earlier, but I'm happy to share with you now, is that if you would like your students to feel comfortable talking in your session, if you would like them to, unmute themselves and ask questions and interrupt you, if that's something you want, by all means, you don't have to do it the way we did it. The other option is there, if you plan to have presentations at some point, right? Then a really good idea is to get them to talk in the very first lecture. So encourage them to have a mic set up and then do some kind of a mic check. So This could be literally just, hey, checking if you can hear me. It could be simple as that, to introducing yourself, right? Saying your name, where you're from, where you're currently residing, what your favorite color is, what your pronouns are, whatever it is that you think might suit the even the field that you're in, whatever is best, get them to talk. It will be really beneficial later on for having them comfortable. So I wish I had done this in my course. I didn't. I had some students ask questions throughout. However, it wasn't until the very last session that I heard some of their voices, and I didn't really see their videos on. So even I remember in my closing remarks, I was like, well, if you see me on campus at some point in the future, please introduce yourself, because I don't know what you look like. You know what I look like, but I don't know what you look like. So I was disappointed that I didn't do it earlier on, because I had some people start their presentations introducing themselves to the group, right? And I was sort of kicking myself for that one. So that could be a really important and valuable part of that first lecture. Start off with feedback. So I mentioned this a little bit in the expectations, how you're going to use things. Get some feedback right away as to where your students are at with their capability of using those platforms and tools. Test it out. You can also test it out yourself beforehand. You can encourage your students to test it out beforehand, test it out with them. And then lastly here, this is more important than I realized as well. Students really want to know when you're going to take a break. Okay? And I think even more so in this online environment, because they could walk away and you don't know they're not there. I recently learned the acronym AFK, away from keyboard. I spent a little bit of time puzzling over that. That's a commonly used one in our field of computing, but I didn't know it. But that is very possible that your students could run to the bathroom or go grab a cup of coffee while you're actually teaching. So if you tell them when they next have a chance to do that and what exactly that structure will look like, and update them throughout if that changes on where you're at with the material, I find that really helps for just keeping them engaged while you're talking, keeping them there in front of the computer, and just reducing the chance that they might be like, oh, is this a good time? I could run to the bathroom real quick, right? So that's really valuable. I had 3-hour lectures and we did 2 breaks. At least one of them was 10 minutes. They might have both been 10 minutes if we had the time. Otherwise, minimum of 5 minutes. And that was pretty good, just to and highly encourage them to get up and get away from their computer, especially if you got 3-hour lectures. Some students potentially could be spending a lot of time staring at their screen in online lectures, and that is exhausting throughout the day. We had one week where we had 16 hours of teaching, and we did it in back-to-back weeks, and we were all exhausted. And so, the demands of our students are going to be very high. So the more that you can say, hey, get up, walk away, come back, and then we'll start at this time, right? And then we usually do a check-in. Is everybody here? Put up yeses, and that sort of thing. That can be really valuable. Okay, so to the feedback. So we'll talk a little bit about different ways you can get feedback, types of feedback, different platforms for feedback. And my biggest point through all of this is just constantly ask them for feedback. So as frequently as it makes sense with your lectures and with your style, then ask them for some type of feedback. And I think we have found that it's best to change up what that feedback looks like. So it's not always the same thing you're looking for. Also, I don't think I did that, but I think Jessica or Gurpreet hit the clear all button in the stickies. So you can notice they're all not there, right? So you can hit that before you ask for feedback. Sometimes we've had to hit it after we've asked just to make sure that things were cleared from before. But for example, now I could say, is everybody doing okay? Are we all with me here? I haven't seen too many questions in the chat, so I hope we're doing that. Oh, I did just see the invite due. Oh yeah, so that's invite. Okay, so yeah, I think somebody else said inviting to the meeting. So thank you for answering that question. I missed that one. But yeah, just use those options to check in with your students. And then maybe, the next time ask for questions. Are there any questions in the chat? Does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask a question? Doing exercises is a really good way to get feedback as to how they're actually doing with the material. And I'll go over a couple of examples of that you can actually see live, even with minimal resources in terms of tools. Finding a tool like the sticky. So if you have used your platform and you're going, I don't know where this is on my, whatever my institution is using, ask, or start to try to get a little bit creative as to how you can do this. And I'll hopefully start to spark a little bit of ideas how we can do that with the Google Doc, because that's something that a lot of us have access to. And another one here is polling. So this is an option in Zoom. You can do polls. If your institution has a different platform it's using, for example, the Poll Everywhere at UNB, that one's going to be much more extensive and easier for you to use, easier for your students to use, and there's probably more you can do with it just because that is what it's designed for and their sole focus is on polling. However, you can always pop something into your platform if it has that available. So just checking in, that could be a quick multiple choice question to check in with your students to say, hey, how are we doing? And usually with those platforms and tools, what you can do is create that question. So let's say the stickies aren't available. You create that question that says, you know, how are we doing? I'm here, I'm doing great, I'm learning a lot, is the first answer. And the second answer is, I'm totally lost. And the last answer is, I'm really tired, or whatever it is, right? Just to get some feedback from your students. And then that's a question you can reuse throughout the session. In terms of different feedback methods, like I said, the Google Doc is there. A lot of institutions are using D2L, Brightspace, a lot of different capabilities there. I know the learning and teaching offices, as well as those at D2L, specifically, I'm sure other platforms as well, have been working really, really hard to make sure that your needs are met and accommodated as you try to take on online learning. Because for many of us, we haven't had even the experience to be a participant or student in online sessions other than webinars, which is different. So check with your learning and teaching office or whoever may be sort of handling that transition to online learning and ask them questions. They will very likely have the answers. I used the D2L chat a lot while I was teaching my course. It was the first time I had been on D2L as an instructor, and I was very surprised at how quickly they responded. And I think I messaged on a Sunday and they answered my questions very quickly. So I was really impressed with that. So ask for help with those things. And the idea of today's session is not necessarily to give you all the answers because I don't know them across every platform, but just to give you ideas of what specifically to ask for. Because if you go, okay, is there something like these stickers within what I'm using, then that's a more specific question that they can help you with. And these are just a couple that are here. Slack is our communication channel for our team and across Compute Canada. So that's what we used as a backend channel so that we could communicate among instructors and helpers. Kahoot, I believe, has availability in a free platform. I don't know that about Poll Everywhere, but I've included there because it's at UNB. Just a couple different other learning platforms there, and there are many more, so definitely worth looking into. Okay, so recording your lectures. So I am anticipating that this is going to be a big topic of discussion in the fall, if it hasn't been already. I'll just speak to my experience with this and things that you'll want to consider if you are planning to record your lectures or you're thinking about it and trying to make that decision. So in my session, I was on two minds. I figured my students would like the recording. So I actually started off with asking them in the very first lecture. Again, a lot of this was trial and error and a learning curve for me. So I asked them, and they very much wanted the recording. So I said, okay, I'm going to try recording these lectures. We're going to record, I think I had Tuesday, Thursday lectures. So I said, I'm going to record the first two. We'll see how it goes. And then I, let's say, attempted to make a deal with them. I requested that should I record, I would really hope and encourage them to attend live lectures, because my worry was that I start recording and nobody would come to the lectures, as I would share it on D2L right after the lecture. However, I still found that, you know, in a class of about 20, I think I had 21 registered, and then it ended up being 18. I still got about 50% by the end of the course. And that was in an intersession course, which is very condensed and very busy. And I was very pleased with those numbers. I think people really tried to attend. And what I found, and I asked them for follow-up after we had done a few sessions, is that because of the challenge of the material, and that I talk a little bit quickly, and that English is a second language, they found going back and listening to it again really helpful. And that was the part that I found surprising, is that or shouldn't have, but was glad they made me aware of, is that English is a second language. It can be really helpful to rewatch those and just say, oh, I missed this whole part. I need that explanation again. So that was a really big part. So in the settings, you'll want to check what they are for recording. So that topic right at the beginning of this session, check, like I said, your names and videos will not be included within this. I'd recommend that setting just for the anonymity of those attending your lectures. It also gives you a bit more timeless approach to the lecture should you need to share it again. And then you can also select where you want to record to. So Zoom has the cloud option. I haven't used that because there's a limit to the amount, and I like having the raw recording on my computer. I also then just use QuickTime Video. I'm on a Mac, so QuickTime Video is the very quick default option that I can edit those videos. So I'll trim the beginning and end of the sessions. When you are recording your lectures, you'll want to consider that students probably won't want their voices to be recorded because that is difficult to take out. Or rather, you'd have to sort of edit around it. So what I did is I took breaks in the recording to let them ask questions. So I'd say, okay, I'm stopping the recording now. I verbally do it. And then if you haven't noticed already, you can see that little blinking red recording button. Then you can see that goes away, right? This was usually at our break time. So to take out 10 minutes of dead time and allow people to ask questions and to look at the chat and address questions that don't necessarily make sense if you can't see them in the recording. That was a really good chance to give them a break on that and just know it wasn't being recorded then. Keep in mind that recording your sessions, regardless as to whether or not it's included within your settings, it may affect your students' decision to have their video on. That's just something that, it'll be difficult for you to request both, that you're going to record and have their video on. So just something to consider. And some people may not care. Some people may feel very strongly. The last thing I'll say on the recording your lectures, unless there are questions after, which I'm happy to address, is that the accommodation of having that availability of a recorded lecture to go back to is really, really helpful for your students. This is a bit of a tumultuous time, if I can use that word. So because you don't know what's going on with them, I had students moving in the middle of sessions. The ones who really wanted to be there would message me and say, hey, I can't make the lecture today, but I will definitely follow up with the recording. It's just it's a tough time, and I was glad to be able to offer them that throughout my sessions. I also even asked my students permission to record their presentations for my ability to mark them afterwards. I made it very clear that that was not going anywhere. I did not upload that to D2L. I just, similar to what I did here, I asked, I waited, I didn't receive any objections, and I will discard that video. So that's not something that I need to keep.
Grace,
yep.
There's a question about pace the steps to assist students' notes taking. So can we pause the recording during the session? Not here, sorry. I mean the question about
Yeah, we can address that. So so that's Katie, right? So that's I would say that's I would ask your students. I would simply ask what they would prefer there. If that's what you usually do and you have the time for it within your content, that could be really helpful. I'll touch on this in the exercises, but what we actually have done is use the Google Doc for collaborative note-taking. Etherpad was the one before that, but I believe they're no longer existent unless you have a specific license and have bought that somewhere throughout, or somebody that you're using has. But that's sort of another version of a collaborative document that allows your students to take notes together. That can be very useful. If you have notes, you could do a copy and paste as you go through different sessions so that they have those. But yeah, I guess it depends on time is sort of my biggest first thought on that question. I could see it going either way, but I don't see a harm in pacing it and waiting for your students to be ready for you to go on that material. Just gonna keep reading through a couple questions. When you stop a recording for questions and resume, really good question, Lydia. So it comes out as multiple video files. So when I would stop it and start it, so if I were to stop it now, that would be cut off right here, and then it would start again from the next one, and it comes out as different MP4 files, sorry. You can also, I didn't mention this already, but you can also just record audio. So if you already are giving your students the slides, if you verbally say next slide, then they know where you are, or address the slide that you're on. It's probably clear throughout what you're talking about, but that could be an option as well if you don't want to actually have the videos there. Oh, I think Lydia is answering that question. Thanks, Lydia. So Lydia is another research consultant who's joining us as a helper here. Is it possible in the various platforms to ask students to record their breakout groups? Yeah, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. If that's something that you want, okay, yeah, I'm seeing a shaking head, no. When you record here on Zoom, if I'm recording this whole thing and then we go to breakout rooms, those are not recorded at all. So, if we do test that, you can, know that as you're going in. I don't think that's an option among platforms. I would be surprised if it was. If that's something you want, you might be better off to actually leave the meeting, have students set up their own breakout room meetings and record them and then send you the video. I don't know. Sorry, I don't really know if that helps at all in my answer, but yeah, I don't think that that's available. If anyone knows otherwise, then let me know. All right, we got about 10 minutes, so I'm gonna try and get through the last bit and then we'll open up for more questions and discussion. Oh, that's cool. Okay, so apparently Blackboard Collaborate does. I think there are, who's using Blackboard Collaborate? UPI, is SaintFX as well? I could be wrong on that one. Yes? Okay, yes, thanks, Gurpreet. So I think, there you go, that's an option there. Okay, and Collaborate at Dal, yeah. So there's a lot of really good tools out there. Just because this is the one we landed on doesn't mean that it's necessarily better than others. And to be quite honest, I think that everybody's been in a big rush to try to upgrade all of these materials so that it has all of the capabilities so that you use theirs. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's many more upgrades coming within the upcoming months. Okay, Google Meets had the option off. Great, thanks everyone. Good question, Ben. So asking about if a co-host can record. I haven't actually tried that in a breakout room. I don't know that the option to record is there. We can, maybe I can get one of our helpers to try that when we're in the breakout room if we try that shortly. A co-host can record, but they need to ask the permission of, I think it goes through the permission of the host. That can be set up in your settings. A participant can also request to record. So we actually had this when we were first started out. We really did not want to record our beginning sessions. And we've done both. We've recorded and we have not recorded. We are doing in our workshops, which is a workshop we very often give for training. We do it's called software carpentry's material. So it's not our developed material, and we did not want to record that without their permission. Also, they were 4-4-hour sessions, and that's a lot. So that's not something that we did early on, but we did have people request to record, and we simply said no and explained why, and that was sufficient at that time. However, for a session like this is a lot easier for us to record, and again, with your permission, is something that we can make available to people. Martha's asking about OneNote for collaborative note taking. So if anyone used that, I have not. So Joyce is asking about the record button. Yeah, so if you were to record, it would ask me if it's okay. And then I would have to accept it for you to be able to record. Now you would then get that file, right? Or you would record to the cloud, depending on whether or not you actually have a Zoom license here. Yeah, so I think you'll get notified either way. The way I have my settings is it doesn't actually say anything, but on my other account, I hadn't touched anything with Zoom. And so the default setting actually has a voice, a sort of robotic voice come on that says, this session is being recorded. So you actually hear that. And that will override anybody talking at that time. So that's something you could keep on to, just for an extra little bit of security, knowing that you're informing your students properly. Okay, so I'm going to talk about exercises and then a couple of different things, and then we'll get more questions, I promise. So preparing exercises. So try to find some creative ways to incorporate examples into your lectures. So I find the more you can break this up, the more that it allows students to do something, to type, to write, maybe to speak if you're doing this in a breakout room. But these breaks are really helpful too. And if you can kind of space these out, they can be really good. If you can work the exercises into when you have the breaks, that can give students enough time. One of the things we ran into trouble with this is just not having the time to do it. We ended up taking what's usually sort of a 3.5-hour session to make it 4, including more breaks and then having enough time for exercises. But if you can say, okay, here's an exercise, we're going to take a break now. Or maybe you say, we're going to take a 10-minute break. You have 5 minutes to do the exercise. If it takes you longer, go into your break. We're going to resume at this time, and I'll take up the solution. That can be a really good way to give your students enough time to do the exercise, is to work it into that. Try to wait on this. And this sort of goes back to feedback a little bit, and something that's definitely worth addressing is I've had a few people say that silence or dead air time on an online platform, especially if you can't see anyone, is just really an eternity, and it feels awkward. So I encourage you to embrace the awkwardness as much as it does make things maybe slightly uncomfortable. Try to wait for your students to give you feedback. So even if you're asking and you hear nothing, or you see no stickers, or you're not seeing anything in the Google Doc for the exercises, try to wait. Or if you ask for them for verbal questions, try to wait. Some of it might be they're trying to find the unmute button, right? They're trying to find the chat. They have things set up a certain way on their computer, and they're trying to get to it. So you need a little bit of extra time for that. We tend not to like that silence, but I encourage you to embrace it as best you can, to try to give them the time. And quite often when we put up an exercise, there's a few of us helpers there. We sort of fill the dead air with a little bit of chat about the weather or something, just to keep it a little bit light, and try to encourage and create some of that connectivity between other people. I think I said this before, but try in your, like you do with your feedback, to get different types of feedback. Try different methods of doing exercises. So multiple choice, short answer, those sorts of things. So I've included an example here. So if you only have a collaborative document, or you could also probably recreate this on D2L if you're using that. But basically what we'll do is we will have an exercise, and this could be pasting it into the Google Doc, or it could be sharing it on your screen. So we'll just scroll to the exercise, share it on your screen, say, hey, refer to this exercise, go to the Google Doc. I've made a spot called exercise, whatever number you're on, and it's a multiple choice. It's A, B, C, or D, and then put a plus sign beside the answer that you think is correct. I know that your names can appear in a Google Doc, and within our coworkers, they do, but all of your names I can't see. So you all appear as the anonymous mammals that are up in there. Not all mammals, I guess. So it can be a very nice anonymous way to get feedback from your students if they don't want to be sharing who they are that's typing that. If they do log in, I think they can show it, but actually I don't think I've had a person yet that's shown up as their name that's outside of ACENET. So that can be a really good, quick way to get some feedback as to where they're at. You can also watch what they think, right? Because they might actually put something in first and then change their answer. You could try to encourage them not to look at the answers and what other people are putting in before they put it in. We've had some feedback that may bias their choices. So that can be a good reason to share your question on your screen instead of putting it in the Google Docs, so that they can't actually see what other people are writing first. So Joyce is asking about the anonymous animals in the Google Doc. So that's automatic for me. Now that may not appear that way if you're using it within your institution. So it's for me because we're all from, I guess, sort of a different, I'm trying to think of the word now, sorry, the platform, like we're within ACENET. If you're all, at a specific institution, then that might not happen. I think you could sign out and then use the Google Doc. You may have to sign in to use it. I'm not sure, sorry. I don't know if any of my helpers have a better answer to that. Okay, so I had a question about D2L. Sorry, so that's also the same as Brightspace. I don't know the other name for it. It's a very large company that provides the online learning platform that many institutions use. If you don't know what it is and it's not at your institution, then don't worry about it. It's sort of just like another option. It's basically a place that you can put your course and students can log in and submit their assignments and stuff. So it's what we use here at Memorial University. But I have seen it used elsewhere. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, sorry, Joyce. So Kelly's asking if I've used the polling option. I have used it. We discovered it rather late. I think it was in our settings, or it was a new thing. I'm not sure which, but we have used it. And I can demo it when I'm done here if you want to see what it looks like. It's pretty straightforward. I think you can set up the questions ahead of time, which would be really valuable, because if you type them during your session, it takes the time away from when you can present. Now, if you have a helper, that could be an easy option. You could also do the polling option and just say, exercise 1, what's the answer? A, B, C, or D, and then have them fill it in and not have anything there. That could be a quick way to do it. Yes, there is a whiteboard option with Zoom. Yeah. Yeah, that was a much better way to phrase what I was trying to say, Matthew. Thank you about the anonymous animals. All right, I'm just going to try and get through it a little bit more, just because we are coming up on the hour, so in case anyone does have to go. So the next thing here is just another example of an exercise. So this is not anonymous, or the intention of this is not anonymous, but I did use this in a course that I was a student in. And this is just, exercise 1, short answer kind of question. So you're asking for their feedback on something, or maybe it's a discussion question, and you have a student list. You just copy and paste it into your collaborative document. Students find their name and write beside it. That's a lot easier than having your students create it. It looks a lot nicer on the eyes as you're scrolling through. You can see who said what. The students can see what their classmates said. You can address it specifically. And, I'm going to single you out, Donna, but don't worry, you don't have to do anything. I'm just going to, I can say, oh, Donna, I like what you said here. Could you elaborate on that, right? Like, you can use those kind of examples, and it does get a little bit more personable. So that's another way that you can use the Google Doc. I encourage you to get creative with it. Those sorts of things and different tools can be used in multiple different ways. Okay, so I'm going to get to breakout rooms. So I'd like to test this if we can, but I'm going to start by describing it. If you are using anything like a breakout room, I highly recommend that you describe it as best as you can, as thoroughly as you can, and maybe multiple times before you use it. Because what tends to happen is you go, okay, we're going to do breakout rooms. All right, go. And then your computer does this stuff, and all of a sudden, as a student, you're super confused as to what's happening and what you should be doing, okay? So we've used this for troubleshooting larger issues, which is unlikely to be a thing you can do by yourself as an instructor. But if you had a TA, you could actually send your TA and a student having, for us, it's largely technical issues. We could send them to a breakout room and try to troubleshoot some of that. That doesn't take time away and waiting in the lecture, because we'll wait a certain amount of time, but ultimately we don't want to keep 29 people waiting if one person is having issues. And the main thing that I see this being used for, especially as we go forward into courses in the fall, is small group exercises. So, saying, okay, we're going to do this exercise. It's a little bit more complicated. Collaborate with your classmates, and let's come up with an answer. And the cool thing then you can do is when they come back from the breakout rooms, you can go, okay, breakout room number 1, and you can call them out by name on Zoom and say, all right, Donna, I'm going to use you again. Donna, what did your group come up with, right? And do it that way, okay? So the way that this works is you set up the breakout rooms. I'll talk about that in a second. You click go to the breakout room, and what will happen is all of you who are a part of this meeting, except for me, will be sent into different rooms. So what will happen is you'll leave this main meeting. You won't see me anymore here, and then you'll join a different meeting, okay? And then a couple of different people will pop up, and then you can unmute yourself, talk to them. The chat will be specific to the breakout room, and it's just like moving to a different table or a different room, like making small groups in the classroom, except you can't actually hear any of the other groups, okay? There are 2 options to making this. You can do it automatically or manually. If you have a class of 100 students and you want to use this, I wouldn't recommend doing it manually. It's going to take you too long. And I don't think there's a way to do this before the session, because you don't know who's in the session. So it has to be with who's there. So I would recommend automatically, because the other thing you can do with this is you can shuffle people. So if you hit automatically, so whatever you do in this page here, this is a little pop of what it looks like in Zoom. If you're using different platforms, it'll look different, obviously. I did this, I took this screenshot when nobody was in the meeting, so that's why it says 0. If I did it now, there'll be 73. And then, it'll do your quick math on how many people are going to be in a room. And then what will happen is you'll see something like this. There was no one in my meeting, and I selected 3 rooms. But if there was people there, they would show up below here if I did an automatic room selection. If I did manual, what would I have to do is over here is go assign, and then when I click assign, it'll be a drop-down list of the people in my meeting, and then I can put them in rooms. So we've done both. We have used the manual one, I think, more often in our workshops, because we had enough helpers that we could put a helper in each room and they could facilitate the discussion. If you do automatic, you can still just move your helpers in the rooms you want and switch people around. It's actually pretty straightforward there. You can rename the rooms, you can get rid of the rooms if you don't need them. The nice thing is if you do this once and then come back to the main meeting, talk, go on, you can use the exact same ones again, which can be really nice. what was the last thing I was gonna say? Oh yeah, so the last option here, so it's down at the bottom, okay, is you click options and then there's a few more options that will pop up and you can, it's a checkbox that you can select. And what I would suggest is selecting the option that says automatically move participants into breakout rooms, or whatever the equivalent of this is in your platform. And the reason that I would suggest this is because what happens is, if you leave this unchecked, what will happen is you'll say, okay, we're gonna do breakout rooms. And then they get a pop-up in the bottom of their screen. If maybe they got a lot going on, or just Zoom is very new, or whatever platform you're using is very new, they may not know what to do. And so what this does is it sends them automatically to the room. Now this, I was hesitant to use this at first because it does feel slightly controlling. And I didn't like that, but they can always come back. Like they can leave and come back. And so they can always control that on their end and say, nope, I don't want to be here, and then leave. And it's not going to be a huge deal that way, okay? So without talking too much more about that, if I can get stickies in the participants tab, so if you would like to see a demonstration of this from the student perspective, hit a yes in the participants tab. If there's enough interest, then we'll test it out just for a couple minutes. If you have no interest, you can hit a no or just don't hit anything. And if you are really not interested, maybe grab a coffee or use this time to go to the bathroom, and then we'll resume in probably about 5 minutes when people come back, or maybe even less time. Okay, so there's 21 people interested. So I'm gonna set this up. So let me just stop my screen share quickly. And find Zoom again. Okay, so we're gonna test this out. I'm gonna put you in rooms so there's about 5 to 6 people. So I encourage you to go into the room, introduce yourself, say where you're from. You'll hear from me. There's a way you can broadcast a message to all the rooms, which is cool. And then I will bring you back. When I bring you back, there'll be a countdown for 1 minute that will sort of tell you when to come back. And at that point, you also have the option to come back earlier, okay? If you're not interested, don't worry, your computer will do its thing and then you'll be back with us in a bit. All right, so I'm gonna automatically create these and you're gonna move in automatically. All right, I will see you in a couple minutes.
Hi, Grace.
I muted myself. Hi, Michelle. We're still recording, by the way.
Okay. Are we the only ones in the main room?
There's 2 other people here. Lydia's here and Vilka. Oh, Vilka, she was in one of our sessions before, I think.
Oh. Hi, Vilka. I haven't seen you in ages.
I'm just broadcasting a message to everyone in these rooms. Hello, everyone. All right. Okay, I'm going to close the rooms because we have people coming back. So just for the purpose of the recording and anyone who's here, there's now a countdown on my screen that says that the breakout rooms will close we're at 50 seconds. So people can now come back themselves, or it will automatically bring them back when that time runs out. So I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so everybody should be back now, or just coming back. My numbers are going up. Welcome back. I hope that was an okay experience for everyone. So hopefully I did a good job of explaining it, but I very often haven't in the past and it's been confusing. If you're going to use this, I would suggest doing it twice in your first session, just so they go, oh, okay, the second time they get it a little bit more than the first time. So out of curiosity, how did we like that? Give me some response in your stickies. Yes, no, applicable, not applicable, really whatever you want to say. Huh, weird.
I found it useful. Colin Mitchell and I had a discussion.
So. Ah, nice. I forgot to apologize in advance for cutting you off. So because it was very short today, I didn't want to figure, we all have a lot to discuss. So at least I know I get chatting in those rooms and then you're trying to speed up your conversation because it's cutting off soon. And right. I'm glad you were able to chat.
So it was useful to try it out. Thank you.
Good, no problem. Yeah, so Tara's asking, is there a way to chat with people in the breakout room? So actually, no. So sorry, I was answering your second question. Yes, you can chat with people in the breakout room. The message will not go to everyone. So it'll say everyone, but it's everyone in that room.
In the group.
Yes. Yeah. So, and you can see that because if you click the button that says everyone, so here it shows everybody in this meeting, but in your breakout room, it would show everyone in, I think it might say in breakout room, and then it will say the names that are there. And you can see there's only 4 other names. Yeah. That I don't think so, Matthew. That's a good question. If you can communicate back with the instructor, and that could be the benefit of having a back-end channel. But as far as I know, it's not.
Yeah, but that will actually takes away the whole meaning of the breakout room if you still want to chat with the main instructor.
Yeah, it can be more challenging. So I had a good question here. So Florian's asking if I still see the chat log from before you left. Yes, I can see it. And that's something I can save the chat completely separately from the recording. So if that's something you're interested in, the questions that your students ask, if there's anything in there, you can do that. I know you guys can't, and that's similar to when you come in the meeting. You can't see the chat from before you enter the meeting. And we have not been able to see that that's different across different platforms. We think that's pretty consistent. I know one person this didn't work, so that's too bad. Maybe it just took a little bit of time. I'm not sure. Pre-assign people if you want to retain. Yeah, you can do that. So what will happen now is if I went to go do the breakout room again, it's actually still a pop-up. So just like you can pop out the chat and the participants tab, the breakout room window is still there. So I could name you everybody that was just in your room in breakout room 1, 2, 3. I can see all of that. So I could move people, I could exchange people. For example, if some people leave and you need to, not have someone in a room by themselves, then you could do that. But I could create the exact same ones. And all I would need to do is click that button, open all rooms, and I can keep them open again. Yes, you can share a screen in a breakout room. I need to back up. Over several lectures. Oh, yeah. Okay. So thank you for clarifying that, Ben. Is that what you meant, Sheila? That I don't know. You might have to keep track of that. And yeah, that's a good question. Look into it on your platform. We haven't had the need to do that so much. Maybe it's just not something we've looked into. That would be worth knowing though, for sure. It may be something that, if you open your room, your classroom like 10 minutes early and as your students come in, you can assign them, then you could keep it consistent. If you have a TA, that would be very useful for them to do. Although I think they need to be the host within this platform, but other platforms they may be able to. Okay, I'm gonna do one more slide because that's all I have left here. So I'll talk very briefly about this. It hasn't been as relevant for people, but it is something we used in this platform. So this is a tool that I showed in my settings that needs to be enabled. What happens here is you actually have control of someone else's mouse on their screen, which I have some large asterisks beside because I know that sounds super controlling, but that's not the intent, and it can actually be used as a teaching tool. And there's a lot of steps you have to go through in order to actually make that happen. So first off, it needs to be enabled. The next thing that would happen is your student would share their screen. I would try to encourage the student to only share one window. So you can share your whole desktop or you can share one window. One window gives you less access, which just makes everybody feel a little bit more comfortable. Then what happens is the instructor requests control of the screen, and then the participant has to say yes in order to make it happen. So they can deny this then, right? So they have to actually very actively take a couple steps in order to allow this. So the reason that I'm even bringing this up is this can be a really great troubleshooting tool. If, for us, this is very applicable in coding and programming because we can, show the steps to troubleshoot to the rest of the class, which is kind of the point. So instead of just showing this one student, everybody else sees because you're screen sharing, and it can be a really good learning opportunity for other people to see, okay, I actually ran into this problem before and I have no idea how to get out of it. I just restarted my computer and whatever it is, right? So they may go, oh, okay, that's actually how you do it. And, from you as the expert and the instructor. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there. Moving on to questions and discussion. Thank you for sticking with me. I know we went a little bit longer than intended, but hopefully I was able to answer some of your questions throughout. I will stop the recording now.